Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. People keep asking me why I didn't say something sooner. Why I didn't tell anyone about the guy who kept coming in during my closing shifts at Brewster's Coffee House. The truth is, I did tell someone. I told my manager, Diane, and she brushed it off like I was being paranoid. It's a coffee shop, sweetie. People come in for coffee. But this wasn't about coffee. Anyone who's worked late-night service in a small town knows the difference between a regular customer and someone who's watching you. My 23rd birthday had just passed in September, and I'd been pulling these Thursday and Saturday closing shifts for about 6 months. The money was decent for coastal Maine, and I needed it to save up for a place of my own. Living with 3 roommates in a drafty house off Route 1 wasn't exactly the dream, but it beat moving back in with my parents in Augusta. Brewster's sat on the corner of Harbor Street and Pine, one of those brick buildings that looked charming during tourist season, and absolutely desolate once October hit. By Halloween, most of the summer people had cleared out, and the town felt like it had shrunk to half its size. The first time he came in was mid-September, maybe 2 weeks after my birthday. It was a Thursday night around 9:45 p.m., 15 minutes before closing. We didn't get many people that late on weeknights, maybe 1 or 2 stragglers grabbing a coffee for the road. He walked in wearing a dark green jacket, the kind with too many pockets, and a baseball cap pulled low. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of guys dressed like that around here, especially the ones who worked on the fishing boats or in construction. What struck me was how he didn't look at the menu board. Didn't look at anything except me. He ordered a black coffee, paid in exact change, and sat at the corner table near the window. That table had a direct view of the counter where I worked. I went about my closing routine, wiping down the espresso machine, restocking the pastry case for morning, counting the register. The whole time I could feel him staring. Not glancing. Staring. When I finally looked up, he'd turn his head just slightly like he'd been caught, but not enough to seem embarrassed. Just enough to let me know he knew I'd noticed. He stayed until 10:03 p.m. I'd already locked the front door at closing time, and he'd watched me do it. Then he stood up, walked to the door, waited for me to unlock it, and left without saying a word. Didn't even throw away his cup. The second time was that Saturday. Same routine. Came in at 9:47 p.m., ordered black coffee, exact change, corner table. Same stare. This time I tried making conversation, thinking maybe I was reading too much into it. "Cold out there tonight, huh?" He nodded. Didn't smile, didn't respond, just nodded and kept his eyes on me. I felt this knot forming in my chest, the kind you get when you're in a situation that isn't dangerous yet, but could become dangerous if you make the wrong move. I texted my roommate Jenna around 9:55 p.m. "Creepy guy here again." She wrote back, "Want me to come get you?" I almost said yes. But then I thought about how ridiculous it would sound if I had to explain it to Diane the next day. A guy came in for coffee and sat quietly. That's it. That's the whole story. So I texted back, "No, I'm good. Just venting." He left at 10:05 p.m. that night. I watched through the window as he walked down Harbor Street toward the marina, hands in his pockets, not in any hurry. The streetlights made his shadow stretch out long and thin behind him. It became a pattern. Every Thursday and Saturday for the next month, he'd show up between 9:45 and 9:50 p.m. Always the same order, always the same table, always staring. I started timing my closing tasks differently, staying behind the counter as much as possible, keeping the espresso machine between us like some kind of barrier. I memorized his features during those weeks, the way his eyebrows were darker than his hair, which was a sandy brown that looked greasy under the fluorescent lights. He had this small scar above his left eye, shaped like a fishhook. His hands were rough, calloused, with dirt permanently wedged under his fingernails. He never wore a wedding ring, Never carried a phone that I could see. On October 10th, I finally told Diane about him. We were doing inventory in the back room and I tried to keep my voice casual. "There's this guy who keeps coming in right before close. It's kind of weird." She barely looked up from her clipboard. "Is he bothering you? Like saying anything inappropriate?" I hesitated. "No, but he just sits there and watches me." Diane sighed in that way managers do when they think you're wasting their time. "Honey, we're a public business. As long as he's not harassing you or breaking any rules, there's nothing I can do. Maybe he just likes the coffee." I didn't bring it up again. The Thursday before Halloween, something changed. He came in at his usual time, but instead of going straight to the corner table, he walked up to the counter and stood there. Just stood. I was refilling the sugar dispensers and nearly dropped one when I realized he was right in front of me. "Can I help you?" My voice came out shakier than I wanted. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question. Then he said, "You work alone a lot." Not a question, a statement. My heart started hammering in my chest, but I forced myself to smile. That fake customer service smile I'd perfected over months of dealing with difficult people. "Sometimes. Can I get you anything else tonight?" He didn't answer right away. Just kept looking at me with these pale blue eyes that didn't blink nearly enough. Finally, he said, "Black coffee," even though he'd already ordered and paid. I told him he'd already gotten his coffee, pointed to the cup in his hand. He looked down at it like he'd forgotten it was there, then walked to his usual table without another word. I immediately pulled out my phone and started typing a text to Jenna. He just said something really creepy, but I deleted it. What would I even say after that? He made an observation, he noted that I work alone. Diane was right, he hadn't technically done anything wrong. That Saturday, October 26th, he didn't show up. For the first time in over a month, I closed the shop without him sitting in that corner, watching. I should have been relieved. Instead, I kept glancing at the door, expecting him to walk in any second. The anxiety of anticipating him was somehow worse than having him actually there. I texted Jenna, "Creepy coffee guy didn't come in tonight." She responded with a party emoji and maybe he finally got the hint. But I couldn't shake this feeling in my gut that his absence meant something. When I locked up at 10:15 p.m. and walked to my car in the back lot, I found myself practically running. Every shadow looked like it could be him. Every sound made me whip my head around. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine, checking the back seat 3 times, making sure all the doors were locked. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see that green jacket somewhere behind me. When I finally got to the house, Jenna was still up, watching some reality show in the living room. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed it off, told her I was just tired. But that night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the way he'd said, "You work alone a lot," and wondering what he'd meant by it. Halloween fell on a Thursday that year. I'd been dreading it all week. Thursday meant closing shift, and some part of me knew he'd be back. Diane had asked if I wanted to switch shifts with someone since it was Halloween, but I said no. I don't even know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem scared. Maybe I thought if I acted normal, everything would be normal. The shop was busier than usual during the day. Parents bringing kids in for hot chocolate. Teenagers grabbing pumpkin spice lattes before heading out to parties. By 8 p.m. though, it had cleared out completely. The string of orange lights Diane had hung in the window looked more eerie than festive once the sun went down. I spent the next hour and a half in this state of heightened awareness, every time the door chimed making me jump. At 9:30 p.m. I started my closing routine early. Wiped down the tables, emptied the trash, began breaking down the espresso machine. At 9:47 p.m. the door chimed. I looked up and there he was. Same green jacket, same baseball cap. But this time, he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that makes you realize the person wearing it knows something you don't. He ordered his black coffee. Paid in exact change. walked to the corner table. I tried to focus on closing tasks, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling as I counted the register. I miscounted twice, had to start over. At 9:55 p.m., my phone buzzed. Text from Jenna. "Happy Halloween, we're ordering pizza, want us to save you some?" I started typing back, "Yes, please." But then I looked up and he was staring directly at me. Not just looking, staring with this intensity that made my thumb hover uselessly over the screen. I set the phone down on the counter and went to the back room, pretending I needed to grab something. I stayed there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to calm down, telling myself I was overreacting. When I came back out, he was standing at the counter, not sitting at his table, standing right there, inches from where I'd left my phone. "We're closed," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's only 9:57. He was right. I'd locked the door at 10 p.m. every other night he'd been there. "I'm closing early tonight," I lied. "Halloween and all." He nodded slowly, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he said, "You dropped something." He pointed to the floor behind the counter. My phone. It was on the floor, screen side down. I know I'd left it on the counter. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I saw his shoes, work boots, scuffed and stained, positioned right at the edge of the counter on the employee side. He'd come behind the counter. While I was in the back room, he'd walked around and stood where only staff were supposed to be. The realization hit me like ice water. I straightened up fast, phone clutched in my hand, and took several steps back toward the espresso machine. "You need to leave," I said, and this time my voice definitely shook. "Now." He held up both hands in this mock surrender gesture, that same disturbing smile still on his face. "Just trying to help." He walked back around the counter, slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact the entire time. When he reached the door, he stopped and turned back. "Same time next week?" My throat had gone completely dry. I managed to nod even though every instinct was screaming at me to say no, to tell him never to come back. But I was terrified of what he might do if I antagonized him. He left, and I immediately locked the door behind him, flipping the deadbolt with shaking fingers. I watched through the window as he walked toward the parking lot, but instead of leaving, he just stood there under the streetlight, facing the shop, watching me watch him. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely type. I started writing to Jenna, "He's here again." But then I stopped. "He's here again." Those 3 words looked wrong on the screen, inadequate for what I was feeling. I deleted them and tried again. "That guy from the coffee shop came behind the counter tonight. He moved my phone. I think he..." But I didn't know how to finish that sentence. "I think he what? I think he's dangerous? I think he's planning something?" I had no proof, just this overwhelming sense of dread that had been building for weeks. I stood there with my phone in my hand, cursor blinking, trying to find the right words. Through the window, I could still see him standing in the parking lot. He hadn't moved, wasn't even pretending to walk to a car. Just standing there, hands in his pockets, staring at the shop, at me. I made a decision. I deleted what I'd written and typed something new. "He's here again." Short, simple. Something Jenna would understand meant I needed help. But before I could hit send, the lights went out. Not just in the shop, the street lights too. The whole block had gone dark. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the sudden silence. The only light came from my phone screen, casting this pale glow on my face. And in that glow, I could see through the window that he was gone. The spot where he'd been standing was empty. My first instinct was to call 911, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. They hovered over the numbers while my brain raced through possibilities. Power outage, completely normal for coastal Maine in late October. Wind knocks down a transformer, whole neighborhoods go dark. Happens all the time. But the timing felt too perfect, too deliberate. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the shop. Everything looked normal. Empty tables. Clean counters. The Halloween decorations casting strange shadows on the walls. Then I heard it. A soft knock on the back door. 3 taps, evenly spaced. My whole body went rigid. The back door led to the alley where we took out trash, where delivery trucks dropped off supplies. There was no reason for anyone to be back there at 10 p.m. on Halloween night. No reason except one. The knock came again. 3 taps. Patient. Like whoever was out there had all the time in the world and knew I was listening. I should have called the police right then. Should have hit those 3 numbers and waited for help. But instead, I found myself walking toward the back of the shop, phone flashlight leading the way. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me needed to confirm what I already knew. Maybe I thought if I could just see him, identify him properly, I'd have something concrete to report. I reached the back door and stood there, hand on the deadbolt. The metal felt cold under my palm. I could hear breathing on the other side, slow, steady breaths that matched the rhythm of those knocks. Then a voice, muffled through the door, but unmistakable. "I know you're there." It was him. Had to be. But the voice sounded different than it had inside the shop. Less controlled. More excited. "Open the door," he said. "We need to talk." Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get out the front and sprint to my car. But my car was in the back lot. To get to it, I'd have to go outside eventually, and he'd be waiting. The front door led to Harbor Street, which would be mostly empty this time of night. I'd be running in the dark with no idea where he was or if he had a car. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. Text from Jenna. "You on your way home?" The screen light illuminated my face, and I realized with growing horror that it probably illuminated the gap under the door too. He could see the light. He knew exactly where I was standing. "I just want to talk," he said again. And this time I heard something else in his voice. Impatience. The doorknob started to turn. Slowly at first. Testing. The deadbolt held, but watching that knob rotate made something inside me snap into action. I backed away from the door, typing as fast as I could. "He's here again, back door, call police now." I hit send and immediately dialed 911. My hands were finally working again, adrenaline overriding the fear. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I whispered everything. The man, the weeks of watching, the power outage, the back door. She told me to stay on the line, that officers were 3 minutes away. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. The doorknob had stopped turning, but I could still hear him out there moving around. Footsteps in the gravel. Then silence. The worst kind of silence, where you don't know if the danger has passed or if it's just repositioning. I moved to the front of the shop, keeping my back to the wall, phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me questions to keep me calm, but I barely heard her. I was focused on every sound, every shadow. Then I saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness outside. Not from the street, but from the alley. Multiple beams moving fast. Voices shouting, "Police!" The relief that flooded through me was so intense I actually slid down the wall and sat on the floor. The dispatcher told me the officers were securing the perimeter, that I should stay inside until they cleared the area. Took another 5 minutes before someone knocked on the front door, proper knocking this time, with a voice calling out, "Police, ma'am, you're safe to open the door." They didn't find him. The officers searched the alley, the parking lot, the entire block. They found his coffee cup from earlier that night in the trash can outside, and they found something else. Fresh pry marks on the back door frame, like he'd been testing how easy it would be to force it open. They also found my phone had somehow sent that message to Jenna, even though I'd never hit send on the unsent draft. The officer said sometimes phones glitch under stress, messages get sent accidentally. But I remember deleting what I'd written and starting over. I remember the cursor blinking on "He's here again" without anything after it. The police filed a report, took my statement, checked the security camera footage. The camera showed everything I'd described. Him coming in, standing at the counter. Me going to the back room, him walking behind the counter. But when the power went out, the camera went out too. They saw him leave through the front door, saw him standing in the parking lot, and then nothing. Just static and darkness for the next 11 minutes until the power came back on. No footage of him at the back door. No evidence he'd even gone around the building. They told me I did the right thing by calling. They patrolled the area extra that night and the next few nights after. Diane finally agreed to schedule 2 people for closing shifts. I quit 3 weeks later anyway. I still don't know who he was. The police never identified him from the footage, never got any hits when they ran his description through their system. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever really planning to hurt me, or if he just liked the fear. If he got off on watching someone slowly unravel. I moved back to Augusta after that. Got a job at a bookstore that closes at 6 p.m. I don't work nights anymore. I don't work alone. And I never, ever ignore my gut when someone makes me uncomfortable. Because the scariest thing wasn't what he did. It was realizing how close I came to unlocking that door. Nobody believes me when I tell them I don't remember most of that night. The cops didn't believe me. My parents didn't believe me. And the psychiatrist they made me see definitely didn't believe me. But here's the thing. I've got the photos to prove at least part of what happened. And my car was found exactly where I left it. So something went down in those woods outside Spokane. October 2022 was supposed to be my breakthrough month as a photographer. I'd finally worked up the guts to quit my job at a tech support call center in August, right after my 27th birthday. And my parents had given me some money from selling their house to keep me afloat while I built a portfolio. Every day I wasn't scrambling for freelance work. I was out shooting, forests, abandoned buildings, whatever looked interesting. That Friday afternoon, I found a forum post about Riverside Forest Preserve. This spot about 40 minutes northeast of the city that supposedly had killer autumn colors and almost 0 foot traffic. The photos people posted looked unreal. These golden aspens mixed in with dark pines, and the trails cut through terrain that would photograph like something out of a fantasy movie. I loaded up my Subaru around 3:30, throwing my camera bag and tripod in the passenger seat, along with a backpack that had water, an extra lens, and some granola bars I never ended up eating. The preserve wasn't some hardcore wilderness area. It was technically managed by the Forest Service with marked trails and everything, but it was far enough out that casual hikers didn't bother with it. I pulled into the gravel parking lot at 4:15, and the place was completely empty. Just my car and this weathered wooden sign showing a map of the trail system under scratched-up plexiglass. 3 different loops, ranging from 2 to 6 miles, all cutting through dense woods with a few ridgeline sections that looked perfect for what I wanted. The sun was already dropping toward the horizon, painting everything in that thick golden light that makes every photo look expensive, and I figured I had maybe 2 hours before it got too dark to shoot. I grabbed my gear, locked the car, pocketed my keys, and headed down the main trail into the trees. The temperature was dropping fast, probably mid-40s, and the woods had that particular smell of cold air mixing with decomposing leaves and pine sap. Everything was quiet except for my boots crunching on the path. The trail started out wide and well-maintained, packed dirt with the occasional route crossing it, but after maybe 10 minutes of walking it narrowed down to barely more than a deer path. I passed a few spots where smaller trails branched off into thicker woods, but I kept following the main route because the map had shown it led to a ridge with good sight lines. My camera was already out of the bag, hanging around my neck, because I kept seeing compositions I wanted to grab, the way the light filtered through the pine branches, clusters of bright orange mushrooms growing on a rotting log, that kind of thing. I wasn't in any rush. The whole point was to find 1 or 2 really solid spots and set up my tripod for some long exposure shots once the light got softer. About half a mile in, I found what I was looking for. The trail opened up where the ridge started, giving me this elevated view over a section of forest that dropped down into a small valley. The aspens were mixed in with the evergreens down there, creating these patches of yellow that looked incredible against the dark green. I could already visualize how the shots would look, maybe underexpose a bit to make the colors pop, shoot in RAW so I could really work the highlights in post. Perfect. I spent probably 15 minutes just walking around that ridge area. checking different angles and waiting for the light to hit just right. The sun was getting lower, maybe 45 minutes from setting completely, and the shadows were starting to stretch out long and dramatic across the forest floor below me. That's when I set up my tripod about 10 feet back from the edge of the ridge, right where the trail curved along the tree line. I mounted my camera, framed up a shot looking down the trail as it disappeared into the valley, and started making adjustments. The whole process was automatic by that point. Check the level, adjust the legs on uneven ground, dial in my settings. I took a few test shots, chimping the screen to check exposure, and everything looked good. But here's the weird part, and I didn't even notice it at the time. When I reviewed those photos later, really zoomed in and examined them, you could see something in the background. Way down the trail, maybe 100 yards into the trees, there was this shape that didn't quite match the surroundings. Not obvious. I wouldn't have caught it if I wasn't specifically looking, but it was there, like someone standing very still behind a cluster of thin tree trunks, just barely visible. At the time, though, I didn't see anything. I was focused on my composition, on getting the settings right, on capturing that specific quality of light before it disappeared. I kept shooting for another 20 minutes, moving the tripod around to different positions, trying various focal lengths. The woods were absolutely silent except for the occasional bird call, echoing from somewhere deeper in the preserve. No wind, no rustling, nothing. That kind of silence where you become hyper-aware of your own breathing, and every small sound you make seems too loud. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have the whole place to myself, how these shots were going to look amazing in my portfolio. Around 5:15, the light was starting to fade into that blue hour transition, and I decided to pack it in. I'd gotten what I came for, probably 40 or 50 shots that I knew included at least a few keepers. I collapsed my tripod, packed my camera back into the bag, and took one last look at the valley below. That's when I heard it. Not a loud sound, just this faint cracking noise, like someone stepping on a branch. It came from down the trail, the direction I'd been photographing toward. I turned and stared into the trees, waiting to see a deer or maybe another hiker, but nothing appeared. The forest had gone completely still again, that thick silence pressing in from all sides. I stood there for probably 30 seconds just listening and watching the trail ahead. The light was dim enough now that the shadows between the trees had turned into solid patches of darkness, making it hard to see more than 50 feet down the path. I called out, "Hello?" Felt stupid doing it, but I wanted to know if someone was there. No response. Just my voice getting swallowed up by the trees and then nothing. I told myself it was an animal, something moving through the underbrush off the trail, because what else would it be? But I'd been in plenty of forests before, and I knew what deer sounded like moving through woods. They make multiple sounds, leaves rustling, several branches breaking as they push through, hoofbeats if they're running. This had been one single crack, deliberate and sharp, like someone taking a step and putting their full weight on a stick. Shook it off and started walking back the way I'd come, following the trail toward the parking lot. My camera bag felt heavier now, the straps digging into my shoulders, and I was suddenly very aware of how quickly the temperature had dropped. My breath was visible in the air, these little clouds puffing out in front of me with each exhale. I walked faster than I normally would, not quite jogging but definitely moving with purpose, telling myself I just wanted to get back before it got completely dark. The trail that had seemed peaceful and beautiful an hour ago now felt different, claustrophobic, even though it was the exact same path. The trees seemed closer somehow, the shadows deeper. About halfway back to the parking lot, I heard it again. Another crack, same sound, but this time it was closer and definitely behind me. I stopped walking immediately, spinning around to look back down the trail. Nothing. Just the darkening path disappearing into the trees, the last bits of twilight filtering through the canopy. My heart was hammering now, that primitive part of your brain screaming that something's wrong even when you can't see any actual threat. I waited, straining to hear any follow-up sound, any movement. Silence. Complete and total silence. Not even birds anymore. I started walking again, faster now, my boots hitting the trail hard enough that I was making plenty of noise myself. I didn't care about being quiet. Part of me wanted to make noise, wanted to announce my presence, like that would somehow make whatever was out there leave me alone. The rational part of my brain kept trying to calm me down. You're alone in the woods at dusk. You're psyching yourself out. There's nothing here. But that rational voice was getting quieter with every step. Another sound, and this time I knew I wasn't imagining it. Footsteps. Not animal sounds, not branches randomly falling. Actual footsteps moving through the forest parallel to the trail. I could hear them clearly now, matching my pace, staying maybe 20 or 30 yards to my right in the thicker woods where I couldn't see through the trees. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I started again, slower this time, listening hard. The footsteps resumed, maintaining that same distance. My throat felt tight and my mouth had gone completely dry. Someone was out there pacing me, staying just out of sight in the darkening woods. I thought about calling out again, asking who was there, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said making noise, drawing attention to myself, was the wrong move. Instead, I kept walking, faster and faster, until I was basically jogging down the trail. The footsteps kept pace. Not running, not rushing, just matching my speed exactly. Like whoever it was didn't need to hurry because they knew where I was going. The parking lot was the only way out, and they knew I had to go there. I could see the trailhead up ahead now, maybe 100 yards away. The opening in the trees where it met the gravel lot. My car would be right there. Safety. I broke into an actual run, my camera bag bouncing against my back, my tripod banging against my hip where I'd strapped it to my pack. The footsteps in the woods sped up too, crashing through brush now, not bothering to be subtle anymore. They were running parallel to me, keeping pace, and I realized with absolute certainty that whoever it was could see me, but I couldn't see them. The trail curved slightly, and then I burst out into the parking lot, gasping for air, my lungs burning from the cold and the exertion. My Subaru was exactly where I'd left it, sitting alone in the gravel lot that was now almost completely dark. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. And that's when I realized the footsteps had stopped. The woods behind me were silent again. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't want to see if someone was standing at the tree line watching me. I just got my keys out, hit the unlock button, and heard the beep and saw the lights flash. I yanked open the driver's door and practically threw myself inside, immediately hitting the lock button. The sound of all 4 doors locking simultaneously was the most comforting thing I'd ever heard. I sat there in the driver's seat, breathing hard, staring at the steering wheel while my hands shook from adrenaline. The dome light was still on, giving me a little bubble of visibility inside the car, and I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale and sweaty despite the cold. I needed to start the car and get out of there, but for some reason I couldn't make myself put the key in the ignition yet. I was trying to process what had just happened, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just another hiker who happened to be walking the same direction as me. But I knew that wasn't true. Nobody hikes off trail in the dark, and nobody matches someone else's pace that perfectly by accident. That's when I saw the movement in my passenger side mirror. Just a flicker, something shifting position near the tree line about 40 feet behind my car. My entire body went rigid. I stared at the mirror, not daring to turn around and look directly, and then I saw it again. Definitely a person, standing just inside the shadow of the trees. They were tall, wearing dark clothes that blended with the forest, and they were completely still, facing my car. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, couldn't see their face. They were just standing there, watching. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands and turned it. The engine started immediately, thank God, and I threw the car into reverse without even checking behind me, just desperate to move, to get away from that figure. I backed up maybe 10 feet before slamming on the brakes and shifting into drive, and in that brief moment when my reverse lights lit up the area behind me, I saw them clearly. They'd moved. They were closer now, maybe 20 feet from where my car had been parked, standing in the middle of the gravel lot. Still not moving, still just watching. The reverse lights went off as I shifted gears, and the figure disappeared back into darkness. I floored the accelerator, spitting gravel everywhere as my tires spun and caught, and I tore out of that parking lot like something was chasing me, which I guess something was. I don't remember the drive home. I know that sounds insane, but I have zero memory of the 40-minute trip back to my apartment. The next thing I clearly remember is sitting in my living room with all the lights on, still wearing my jacket, my camera bag on the floor next to me. My phone said it was almost 8 o'clock, which meant I'd lost about an hour and a half somewhere. I chalked it up to shock, to my brain just being on autopilot while I drove. But it bothered me. Still bothers me. I sat there for a long time, maybe another hour, just trying to calm down and make sense of what happened. Eventually, I convinced myself to pull out my camera and look at the photos I'd taken. Maybe there was something in them, some explanation, some detail I'd missed. I uploaded the SD card to my laptop and started going through the images one by one. The early shots looked exactly how I remembered. Beautiful golden light, the aspens, the valley, everything perfectly normal. But then I got to the later photos, the ones I'd taken from the ridge right before I started packing up. I zoomed in on one of them, just examining the composition, and that's when I saw it. Way down the trail in the background, barely visible between the trees, there was a person standing there. Not walking, not moving, just standing motionless, facing the camera, facing me. I went through every single photo from that location, and they were in 4 of them, always in the same spot, always perfectly still. In 2 of the images you could barely make them out, just a dark vertical shape that could have been a tree trunk if you weren't looking carefully. But in the other 2, where the angle and lighting were slightly different, you could see it was definitely a human figure. They were too far away to make out any details. No face, no clothing specifics, nothing that would help identify them. Just a person-shaped shadow standing deep in the woods, watching me work. I felt sick looking at those photos. This person had been there the whole time I was shooting, just standing motionless in the trees, and I never saw them. Never had any idea they were there until I heard that first branch crack. How long had they been watching before that? Had they followed me from the parking lot? Were they already in the woods when I arrived? The police asked me all these questions later, and I didn't have answers to any of them. What I did next was probably stupid, but I was terrified and not thinking clearly. I grabbed my phone and called 911. Told them everything. The footsteps, the figure in the parking lot, the person in my photos. The dispatcher kept me on the line and said they'd send someone to check out the preserve. 2 officers showed up at my apartment about 45 minutes later to take my statement and look at the photos. They were professional about it, wrote everything down, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. One of them even suggested maybe it was just another photographer who happened to be shooting in the same area. The next morning, I got a call from the sheriff's department that made everything so much worse. They'd sent officers to check the preserve at first light, and they found my car in the parking lot. My car. The same Subaru I'd driven home and parked outside my apartment building. The one I was staring at through my window while talking to the detective on the phone. Except it wasn't the same car, obviously. Mine was here. But there was a blue 2004 Subaru Outback with my exact license plate sitting in that gravel lot with the driver's door wide open, keys in the ignition, and my tripod still set up at the trailhead facing the woods. They ran the plates multiple times. They matched. They checked the VIN through the windshield. It matched. The detective asked me very carefully if I was absolutely certain I'd driven home last night, if there was any possibility I'd left my car there and gotten a ride with someone. I told him to look outside my building. My car was right there. He went quiet for a long time, then said they'd send someone to verify. 2 different officers came to my apartment within an hour, examined my car, photographed it, checked the VIN. Same car. Same exact car that was simultaneously sitting in the Forest Preserve parking lot 40 minutes away. They eventually figured out what happened, though the explanation didn't make me feel any better. Someone had cloned my license plates, probably saw my car parked somewhere around Spokane, noted the make and model, and made duplicates of my plates to put on their own vehicle. Same year, same color Subaru. It's apparently more common than you'd think, usually for toll evasion or parking ticket avoidance. But this person had driven their cloned car to the preserve after I left, parked it in the exact same spot, and staged it to look like I'd never made it out of those woods. Door open, keys in the ignition, tripod set up. Like I'd vanished mid-shoot. The police theory was that whoever followed me in the forest had intended to do something. Rob me, attack me, worse. But I'd gotten away. So they went to plan B, making it look like something terrible had happened to me in those woods. Maybe hoping to throw off an investigation, or just fuck with me psychologically. They never found who did it. No prints on the abandoned car, no security cameras in the area, nothing. The vehicle had been reported stolen from a lot in Spokane 3 days before, and it was eventually returned to its owner. The whole case just died, but I know what I saw. I know someone stalked me through those woods, someone who had already gone through the effort of cloning my plates and planning something elaborate and disturbing. I haven't been back to any forest preserve since then. Can't bring myself to shoot anywhere isolated. And sometimes when I'm going through old photos on my hard drive, I'll see those images from that day and zoom in on that figure standing in the trees, and I'll wonder if they're still out there, watching someone else, waiting in the woods with a camera and a stolen car and God knows what else. That's what keeps me up at night. Not what happened, but what was supposed to happen if I hadn't run fast enough. October in Kentucky gets dark early, and that particular evening in 2016 was no exception. I'd been babysitting for the Andersons for about 6 months by then. They lived 40 minutes outside Lexington on this old tobacco farm that had been converted into a regular house sometime in the 80s. The property sat on 12 acres of mostly empty fields, with the nearest neighbor being a good half-mile down the gravel road. I remember driving out there that night, watching the sun disappear behind the tree line while my beat-up Corolla struggled with the unpaved driveway. The Andersons had 2 kids, Chloe, who'd just turned 7, and her little brother Noah, who was 4. Sweet kids, never gave me any trouble, always went to bed when they were supposed to. Their parents were attending some medical conference in Louisville. Dr. Anderson was a pediatrician, and his wife Nancy worked as a nurse at the same hospital. The house itself was one of those sprawling ranch-style places with windows everywhere. Floor to ceiling in the living room, big bay windows in the kitchen, regular windows in every bedroom. Nancy Anderson loved natural light, she'd told me once. Couldn't stand feeling boxed in. That night, though, with darkness pressing against all that glass, I wished there were fewer ways to see outside. Or more accurately, fewer ways for someone outside to see in. The kids and I had dinner around 6:30. Mac and cheese with hot dogs cut up in it because that's what Noah always requested. We played some board games afterward, Candyland mostly, and I got them into their pajamas by 8. While they brushed their teeth, I noticed the motion sensor light by the garage kept turning on. Probably deer, I figured. The Andersons had mentioned deer came through the property all the time, eating from Nancy's vegetable garden. But the light would click on, stay bright for its programmed 30 seconds, go dark for maybe a minute, then flash on again. Like something was walking back and forth out there, just beyond where I could see. Around 8:30, after both kids were tucked in their beds, I settled into the living room couch with my sociology textbook. I was finishing my degree at Eastern Kentucky University, just had 1 semester left. The house was quiet except for the dishwasher humming in the kitchen and the occasional creak that old houses make. I'd been reading for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. 3 distinct knocks on the dining room window. Not frantic or aggressive, just 3 measured taps like someone politely trying to get your attention. I looked up from my book, staring at the dark glass, but couldn't see anything beyond my own reflection in the lamplight. The motion light by the garage wasn't on anymore. I waited, listening, telling myself it was probably a tree branch. The Andersons had this big oak that grew close to that side of the house. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. I went back to my reading, though I kept losing my place in the same paragraph about social stratification. Then came 3 knocks on the kitchen window. Same rhythm, same pressure, like knuckles against glass. The kitchen was on the opposite side of the house from the dining room. No trees on that side, just open field stretching toward the woods. I got up slowly, leaving my textbook on the couch, and walked to the kitchen doorway. The overhead light was off. I'd only left the small light above the stove on. Through the window above the sink, blackness, just my ghostly reflection staring back. The knocking came again, this time on the living room window, the huge floor-to-ceiling one. 3 taps. Deliberate, patient, whatever was doing this was circling the house. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But what would I say? Someone's knocking on windows? They'd think I was paranoid. The Andersons lived so far out that kids playing pranks seemed unlikely. But the alternative made my chest tight with a fear I didn't want to name. I decided to check on the kids first. Climbing the stairs as quietly as possible, I peeked into Noah's room, then Chloe's. Both were sound asleep. Noah sprawled out like a starfish with his dinosaur stuffed animal. Chloe curled up under her purple comforter. Their peaceful breathing should have calmed me, but instead it made me feel more responsible, more alone. As I stood in the hallway between their rooms, the knocking started again. This time on the window at the end of the hall, right behind me. 3 taps. Then immediately after, 3 taps on Noah's bedroom window, then Chloe's. Whoever was outside knew exactly where we all were, knew the layout of the house. My mouth went dry. I hurried back downstairs, grabbing the house phone from the kitchen counter. The Andersons had a landline because cell service was spotty out here. As I picked up the receiver, I saw something that made me stop breathing for a second. There was condensation on the outside of the kitchen window, like someone had been standing there, breathing against the glass. The knocking suddenly became rapid, urgent, moving from window to window so fast it seemed impossible for one person. Kitchen, living room, dining room, back door, garage door window, all around the house in a frantic circle. Not 3 polite taps anymore, but demanding pounds that rattled the frames. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the dispatcher someone was trying to break in. She kept me on the line, said deputies were on their way, told me to lock myself and the kids in a bathroom. But before I could move, everything stopped. Complete silence. No knocking, no footsteps outside. Even the dishwasher had finished its cycle. The dispatcher was still talking, but I barely heard her. Something about the sudden quiet felt worse than all that knocking. Through the kitchen window, I could see the motion light by the garage click on again. This time, illuminated in its harsh white glow, I saw someone standing at the very edge of its range. They weren't moving, just standing there facing the house, too far away to make out features, but close enough that I could tell they were tall, wearing something dark, maybe a coat or a long jacket. The figure raised one arm and waved at me. Slow, deliberate, like we were old friends meeting across a parking lot. Then they turned and walked backward into the darkness, keeping their face toward the house the entire time until the black swallowed them completely. The motion light clicked off. I told the dispatcher what I'd seen, and she said to get the children and lock ourselves in the bathroom now. But as I turned toward the stairs, I heard the front door handle jiggling. Not aggressive, just testing, seeing if it was locked. I'd checked it twice already. The handle stopped moving. Then I heard the same sound at the back door in the kitchen. Testing. The side door by the garage. Testing. Every exterior door, one after another, like they were making sure I'd secured everything. My legs felt weak as I forced myself up the stairs. I grabbed Noah first, his small body heavy with sleep, then rushed to Chloe's room. She stirred when I picked her up, mumbling something about a bad dream. If only she knew. I carried them both into the master bathroom, locked the door, and set them down in the bathtub with some towels as cushions. Chloe woke up more fully then, confused and scared by my behavior. I told her we were playing a game, like hide and seek. but we had to be very quiet. Noah stayed asleep, curled against his sister. The dispatcher was still on the line, telling me the deputies were 8 minutes out. 8 minutes feels like hours when you're hiding in a bathroom with 2 kids, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass sliding. The Andersons had this old sliding window in the laundry room that didn't lock properly. Nancy had mentioned getting it fixed, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. The window was small, but an adult could squeeze through if they really wanted to. I heard something hit the laundry room floor. A soft thud, like feet landing. Footsteps, slow and careful, moving through the house. Not rushing, not searching frantically, just walking like they had all the time in the world. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath, pulling Chloe closer, my hand over her mouth gently to keep her from speaking. The first stair creaked, then the second. Whoever was in the house was coming upstairs. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and paused. Through the gap under the bathroom door, I could see a shadow blocking the hallway light. They were standing right outside, not moving, not trying the handle, just standing there, breathing. I could actually hear them breathing, deep, steady breaths like they were trying to calm themselves down or maybe savoring the moment. The dispatcher was whispering that deputies were 3 minutes away, but her voice sounded tinny and distant through the phone pressed against my ear. Then the person outside spoke, and it was worse than any scream or threat could have been. A normal voice, conversational, almost friendly. "I know you're in there with them. I knocked first." That was me being polite. The voice belonged to a woman, maybe middle-aged with this slight rural Kentucky accent. "You shouldn't have called anyone. Now it's all messed up. The timing, the way it was supposed to happen." She sighed, like she was genuinely disappointed. "I've been watching this house for months, learned their schedules when they'd need a babysitter. You're earlier than usual tonight. That wasn't part of the plan." My mind raced trying to place the voice, but I'd never heard it before. She kept talking through the door, calm as if we were chatting over coffee. "The Andersons don't know me, but I know them. Know that Nancy leaves that laundry room window unlocked. Know that doctor husband of hers keeps cash in his office downstairs, hidden in that ugly ceramic vase. Know those kids' names, their bedtimes, their favorite snacks." She tapped on the door, just once, gentle. "See? I used to live in this house, 20 years ago, before the bank took it, before my whole life fell apart in these rooms. My daughter's nursery was where little Noah sleeps now. Painted it yellow myself, though they've covered it with that blue. Coming back here, walking through at night when everyone's sleeping, it's the only time it feels like home again." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you had to go and ruin it. Had to be awake, had to see me, had to make those calls. Now they'll arrest me and I'll never get to walk through my house again." The shadow under the door shifted, and I heard her slide down to sit against the wall. The message on the window was for next time, but there won't be a next time now, will there? Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The woman stood up quickly. "They're here faster than I thought they'd be." Her footsteps moved away from the bathroom door, back toward the stairs. "You take good care of those babies. They sleep so peaceful, don't they? I never meant any harm. Just wanted to walk through my old life sometimes. Remember when things made sense." I heard her going down the stairs, not rushing but not dawdling either. The front door opened. She must have unlocked it from the inside. Through the small bathroom window, I could see red and blue lights flashing across the trees. The dispatcher was saying something about staying put until deputies cleared the house, but I was focused on listening to what was happening downstairs. Car doors slamming, shouts, the woman's voice, tired now. "I'm not armed. I used to live here, that's all. I just wanted to come home." There was a scuffle, commands to get on the ground, the metallic click of handcuffs. Chloe was crying quietly, and I held her tighter, Noah finally stirring in the tub. 2 deputies eventually came upstairs, announced themselves, and told us it was safe. Later, after the kids were back in their beds and I'd given my statement 4 different times, one of the older deputies told me her name was Judith Brennan. She lost the house in 2007 after her husband died, and left behind massive medical debt. Her daughter had passed away from leukemia in what was now Noah's room. She'd been breaking into the house for almost a year, always when the family was gone, never taking anything, just walking through the rooms. The Andersons had noticed small things, furniture slightly moved, windows they thought they'd locked found unlocked, that kind of thing, but assumed they were misremembering. Tonight was different because she knew they'd hired a babysitter, thought I'd fall asleep on the couch like apparently the girl before me used to do. When I stayed awake, when I noticed her, she panicked and tried to scare me into leaving. The message she traced on the kitchen window while I was hiding upstairs, "Don't open the door again," wasn't a threat. According to her, it was advice. She didn't want anyone else letting strangers into what she still considered her home. The Andersons came back that night, cutting their conference short. They moved 2 months later. I never babysat there again, but sometimes I drive past that house and wonder if Judith still watches it from somewhere in the darkness, waiting to go home. My student loans had just hit 5 figures when I downloaded the rideshare app that October. I'd been staring at my laptop screen in my cramped studio apartment near the University of Oklahoma, doing the math for the 100th time, trying to figure out how to stretch my work-study paycheck from the campus bookstore to cover rent, food, and gas for my 2009 Honda Accord. The solution was obvious. I needed another income stream. My cousin had been driving for one of those apps in Dallas and claimed she made decent money on weekends, especially late nights when surge pricing kicked in. I figured Norman had enough bars and enough students without cars that I could make it work. Plus, the Accord had just passed inspection. The interior was clean enough, and I'd always been good with directions even before GPS made it idiot-proof. 6 weeks into this side gig, I'd developed a routine. Thursday through Saturday nights from 10 until around 2 in the morning, sometimes later if the money was flowing. That Friday night had been steady but unremarkable. I'd already made 4 trips by the time midnight rolled around. 2 sorority girls heading to Bricktown, an older gentleman who needed a ride home from his shift at the hospital, a group of grad students bar-hopping on Campus Corner, and a very drunk guy who spent the entire ride showing me pictures of his German Shepherd. My earnings were sitting at about $70 after gas, which meant I could actually buy something besides instant noodles that week. I was parked in a McDonald's parking lot, scrolling through my phone and debating whether to call it a night, when the app chimed with another ride request. The pickup location made me pause. It was way out by the abandoned warehouses near the Canadian River, at least 15 minutes from where I was sitting, but the estimated fare showed $28, and the destination just said, River Area. Vague, but not unusual. Sometimes people put in general areas and gave specific directions once you picked them up. The drive out there took me through parts of Norman I usually avoided after dark. The streetlights got fewer and farther between as I headed south, following the GPS through neighborhoods where half the houses had plywood over the windows and cars sat on blocks in front yards. My headlights swept across empty lots full of tall grass and the occasional shopping cart tipped on its side. The radio started picking up more static than music, so I switched it off and drove in silence except for the GPS's occasional continue straight. When I finally reached the pickup spot, it was just a gravel pull-off next to a rusted gate that had probably once led to some kind of factory or processing plant. A single streetlight about 50 yards away cast this weak orange glow that made everything look sickly. I couldn't see anyone at first, and I was about to cancel the ride and get out of there when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete barrier near the fence. The man who approached my car moved with this weird, deliberate slowness, like he was being careful about each step. He wore a long wool coat that looked expensive but old-fashioned, the kind with a high collar that businessmen wore in those black and white movies my grandmother used to watch. His face was hard to make out in the dim light, but I could see he was clean-shaven with dark hair combed straight back, with what looked like too much product. When he opened the back door and slid in, the dome light illuminated him for just a second. Pale skin, maybe mid-40s, with these deep-set eyes that didn't quite meet mine in the rearview mirror. "Good evening," he said, and his voice had this formal quality to it, like someone who'd learned English from old textbooks. "I need to go to the old houses near the river, the historic ones." I asked him for a specific address, explaining that I needed something to put into the GPS, but he just waved his hand dismissively. "Just drive toward the river. I'll tell you when we're close." I started driving, heading east toward where I knew the Canadian River curved through town. The app was showing an error message when I tried to input the destination, just spinning endlessly, so I had to rely on his directions. Every few minutes he'd lean forward slightly and tell me to turn left or right, always in that same measured tone. Left at the stop sign, right after the yellow house, straight through this intersection. What made my chest tighten was that each turn took us through neighborhoods I knew well. First past the elementary school where I'd tutored kids for community service credits, then by the park where my study group sometimes met on sunny days. We were heading toward the older residential areas on the east side, where professors and longtime residents lived in those big Victorian-style houses with wraparound porches. The closer we got to my own neighborhood, the more I kept checking the mirrors, watching him sit perfectly still in the back seat, his hands folded in his lap like he was in church. After about 10 minutes of this guided tour through increasingly familiar streets, I couldn't ignore it anymore. We were definitely heading toward my apartment complex, not just the general area, but taking the exact route I drove home every night. When we passed the convenience store where I bought milk every Sunday, only 3 blocks from my building, I finally spoke up. "Hey, these old houses by the river, can you be more specific? Because we're getting pretty far from the Canadian River now." He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window at the passing houses. Then in that same calm voice he said, "Rivers change course over time. The old maps show different paths." That response made absolutely no sense, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to pull over and tell him to get out. But we were so close to my neighborhood that I worried he might already know where I lived, and I didn't want to escalate things while we were alone on a dark street. When we turned onto Sycamore Avenue, my street, I made a split-second decision to drive past my apartment building and keep going toward the actual historic district another mile east. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I watched him in the rearview mirror, trying to see if he was looking at the buildings we passed, if he was checking the numbers, if he recognized where we were. But he just sat there with this blank expression, occasionally glancing down at something in his lap. That's when I noticed he had a piece of paper, folded into a small square, that he kept turning over in his fingers. "The house with the blue trim," he suddenly said, and my whole body went rigid. My apartment building had blue trim around the windows. It was one of the reasons I'd chosen it, because it reminded me of my parents' house back in Tulsa. "What house with blue trim?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are several around here." He leaned forward then, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp and medicinal, like old aftershave mixed with hospital disinfectant. "You know which one," he said quietly. I slammed on the brakes right there in the middle of the street, not caring anymore about being polite or professional. My finger was already on the emergency button on my phone that would call 911, and I turned around to face him directly. "Get out of my car, right now. The ride is over." But when I turned around, the back seat was empty. The door on the passenger side was hanging wide open, interior light illuminating the worn fabric seats. But he was gone. Not walking away, not running down the street, just gone. I sat there for maybe 5 seconds, too stunned to move before scrambling to check that all my doors were locked. That's when I saw it, the piece of paper he'd been holding, now unfolded and sitting on the middle of the back seat. With shaking fingers, I reached back and grabbed it. It was an old map, the kind from a gas station, probably from the 80s based on the faded colors and style. Someone had drawn a red circle around a specific spot, and when I looked closer, my entire body went cold. It was my apartment building, not just the street or the block, but the exact building, with my unit number written in small, neat handwriting next to it. Apartment 237. I drove straight to the police station, not even thinking about going home. The map was clutched in my hand the entire time, wrinkled from my sweaty grip. The officer at the front desk, a tired-looking woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun, listened to my story with the kind of patient expression that told me she'd heard stranger things. She took the map, put it in an evidence bag, and had me fill out a report. When I showed her the ride request on my phone app, though, her expression changed. There was no record of the pickup, no ride history, no payment pending, nothing. According to the app, my last ride had been the drunk guy with the German Shepherd photos, completed at 12:47 a.m. It was now 2:15 a.m., and according to my phone, I'd somehow lost over an hour. The officer suggested maybe the app had glitched. Maybe someone had tried to request a ride and it hadn't gone through properly. But we both knew that didn't explain the map or how he knew my address. They sent a patrol car to follow me home and check my apartment before I went inside. The two officers, both younger guys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, walked through each room while I waited in the hallway. They checked the closets, looked behind the shower curtain, even opened the kitchen cabinets for some reason. "All clear," one of them told me, handing back my keys. "Make sure you lock up tight, maybe put a chair under the doorknob if it makes you feel better." After they left, I did exactly that. Chair under the doorknob, kitchen knife on my nightstand, every light in the apartment blazing. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on my couch watching the door and jumping at every sound from the hallway. Around sunrise, I finally started to doze off when I heard something that made me bolt upright. The distinct sound of paper sliding under my door. I crept over, knife in hand, and saw it. Another folded piece of paper. This time it was a receipt from a hardware store dated that morning, 6:23 a.m. Someone had purchased a single item, a copy of a key. The billing address at the bottom was mine, and the last 4 digits of the credit card matched my own. I called 911 immediately, my voice cracking as I explained about the receipt. While I waited for the police to arrive again, I called my credit card company from my laptop, hands trembling as I typed in my account information. There it was, a pending charge from Hartman's Hardware, time-stamped exactly as the receipt showed. The woman on the phone assured me they would reverse the charge and flag it as fraud, but that didn't explain how someone had my card information or why they wanted me to know they'd copied a key. When the police arrived this time, it was a different officer, an older man named Officer Briggs, who actually seemed to take me seriously. He bagged the receipt and called for a locksmith to come change all my locks immediately, on the department's dime. While we waited for the locksmith, he sat with me in my living room and asked detailed questions about the man from the ride, writing everything down in a small notebook. "Has anyone been following you lately? Any weird encounters at work or school? Ex-boyfriends, rejected guys from dating apps, anything like that?" I told him no to everything, but then remembered something that made my breath catch in my throat. About 3 weeks earlier, I'd given a ride to another passenger late at night, a younger guy who'd been completely silent the entire trip except for one comment. When we'd passed my neighborhood, I'd noticed because we took the same exit off the highway, he'd said, "Nice area, safe, good for young women living alone." I'd thought it was a creepy thing to say, but figured he was just making awkward small talk. Now I wondered if he'd been fishing for information, if maybe he'd watched me drive home after dropping him off. Officer Briggs wrote it all down and promised they'd pull security footage from the hardware store, check traffic cameras from that night, do everything they could. The locksmith arrived and spent 2 hours replacing every lock, even adding a deadbolt to my bedroom door at my request. For the next 3 days, I stayed with my cousin in Oklahoma City, too scared to be alone in my apartment. When I finally went back, Officer Briggs called with an update. They'd found the man on the hardware store security footage. Tall, wool coat, same description I'd given. But his face was always turned away from the cameras, like he knew exactly where each one was positioned. The credit card fraud department traced the breach to a skimmer that had been found on an ATM near campus, one I'd used the week before. As for the man himself, he'd paid cash at the hardware store and left no other trail. I quit driving for the rideshare app that same day, deleted it from my phone without even cashing out my final earnings. The money wasn't worth it anymore. I broke my lease 2 weeks later, taking the financial hit to move in with 3 other girls from my economics class who needed a 4th roommate for a house near campus. My new room was on the 2nd floor with a window that faced the backyard, no street access, and I made sure to vary my route home every day, never falling into a pattern. For months afterward, I'd wake up at night thinking I heard paper sliding under my door, but it was always just the wind or the house settling. Officer Briggs checked in with me periodically for about 6 months, always asking if I'd noticed anyone following me or if anything else strange had happened. Nothing ever did. The man with the wool coat never tried to contact me again, never showed up at my new place, just vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared in my back seat that night. Sometimes I wonder if he got what he wanted, just to scare me, to prove he could find me, to show me how vulnerable I was driving strangers around in the dark. The strangest part came almost a year later when I was cleaning out my old backpack to donate it. In one of the inner pockets, I found another piece of that same old map, folded into a tiny square. This piece showed a different part of Norman, an area I'd never been to, with another red circle drawn around what looked like an empty lot near the river. I gave it to Officer Briggs, who had it tested for fingerprints, but like everything else connected to that night, it led nowhere. He mentioned that they'd had 2 other reports from rideshare drivers about similar incidents, passengers who knew too much, who gave directions to the driver's own neighborhoods, who disappeared leaving behind cryptic messages or items. None of the cases were ever solved, and the police theorized it might be someone with a fascination for scaring young women, someone who studied their routines through the apps and credit card records. They increased patrols around the areas where drivers typically waited for rides and sent out warnings through the rideshare companies, but as far as I know, they never caught anyone. I still have nightmares sometimes about that cologne smell, that measured voice saying, "You know which one," and the way he just vanished from my back seat. I work at a call center now, boring but safe, and I take the bus everywhere even though I still have my Honda. Some nights when I'm walking home from the bus stop, I catch myself looking back, checking if anyone's following, wondering if somewhere out there he's still requesting rides, still studying his maps, still leaving his calling cards for other terrified drivers to find. The October wind had that particular bite to it when I pulled into the Sunoco station just outside Harrisburg that night, the kind that makes you zip your jacket all the way up, even though you're only stepping out for a minute. I'd been driving freight trucks for about 12 years at that point, and my daughter had just started middle school that fall, which meant I was pushing harder to get home each evening instead of crashing at the depot like I used to. The station sat at the intersection where Highway 83 meets that stretch of nothing before you hit the suburbs, one of those places that feels abandoned even when there are people around. The fluorescent lights above the pumps kept flickering, creating these weird shadows that danced across the concrete, and I remember thinking they really needed to fix those before someone had a seizure. My Silverado's tank was running on fumes, and I still had another 40 minutes before I'd see my driveway, so stopping wasn't really optional. I swiped my card and started pumping, doing that thing where you lean against the truck bed and zone out while watching the numbers climb on the display. The only other customer was some guy in a rust-covered sedan 3 pumps over, already pulling away, leaving just me and the teenage clerk visible through the store windows, his face lit blue by his phone screen. That's when I heard footsteps, quick ones, almost like someone was jogging, and this woman appeared from around the side of the building where they keep the air pump and vacuum cleaners. She looked maybe 40, wearing a navy cardigan that was way too thin for the weather, jeans with mud stains on the knees, and these white sneakers that squeaked against the wet pavement. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly fallen apart, blonde strands sticking to her forehead with sweat despite the cold, and she had this way of glancing behind her every few seconds that immediately put me on edge. "Excuse me, sir, I'm really sorry to bother you," she said, and her voice had this raspy quality like she'd been yelling or crying recently, maybe both. She stayed about 6 feet away from me, which I appreciated because it meant she wasn't trying to get too close too fast. But her eyes kept darting between my face and the road behind the station. I know this is going to sound crazy, but there's been this car following me for the past 20 minutes, ever since I left the Walmart over in Camp Hill, and I pulled in here hoping they'd keep going, but they didn't. She wrapped her arms around herself, and I could see her fingernails were painted this chipped purple color, with dirt underneath them like she'd been digging in garden soil. My phone's dead, and I just need a ride to my sister's place down on Paxton Street. It's literally 5 minutes from here. I can show you exactly where if you have GPS. Now, I've got 2 younger sisters myself, and I'd want someone to help them if they were in trouble. But I've also been around long enough to know that gas stations at night are where bad decisions often start. The pump clicked off at exactly $42.17, and I stood there holding the nozzle, trying to figure out if this woman was genuinely scared or if this was some kind of setup. That's when I noticed it. This dark blue Chrysler 300 parked behind the dumpster area where deliveries get unloaded, positioned so you'd miss it unless you were really looking. The engine was definitely running because I could see exhaust coming from the tailpipe in the cold air, but the headlights were completely off, and through the windshield I could make out 2 shapes in the front seats, just sitting there, perfectly still. The woman must have seen me notice them because she grabbed my wrist, not hard but desperate, and her palm was ice cold and clammy against my skin. "Please, they're right there, you can see them yourself," she whispered, and now her whole body was trembling, these little shudders that made her cardigan shake. I tried to lose them by taking random turns, even drove through a McDonald's drive-thru without ordering anything, but they stayed right behind me the whole time. She let go of my wrist and pulled out a wallet from her back pocket, flipping it open to show me a driver's license with her picture on it, though I couldn't read the name in the dim light. "Look, I'm a real person. I work at the CVS pharmacy on Union Deposit Road. I'm not trying to rob you or anything crazy like that. I just need to get away from those people." Her voice cracked on the word people, and she kept rubbing her arms like she was trying to warm up, but I could tell it was more about nerves than cold. The Chrysler's engine suddenly revved, not loud enough to seem aggressive, but just enough to let us know they were paying attention, and the woman actually stepped closer to my truck, putting it between her and them. I put the gas nozzle back and screwed my cap on, taking my time while I tried to think through the situation. Part of me wanted to just tell her to go inside and ask the clerk to call the cops, but another part kept thinking about my daughter, how I'd lose my mind if some creep was following her around. "All right, here's what we're going to do," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse was hammering. "You're going to get in the passenger side, but keep your hands where I can see them the whole time, and we're going to drive straight to the police station on South Cameron Street, not your sister's place." She nodded so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash, already moving toward the passenger door. But that's when things got weird in a way that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. The driver's side door of the Chrysler opened, and this man stepped out, probably 6'3", wearing a black pea coat and jeans, completely normal looking except for the fact that he was wearing sunglasses at 9:30 at night. He didn't walk toward us, just stood there beside his car, hands in his pockets, facing our direction like he was waiting for something. The woman practically dove into my truck, slamming the door and immediately hitting the lock button, then fumbling with the seatbelt like her fingers weren't working right. Through the windshield, I could see the second person in the Chrysler lean forward, and the dashboard light illuminated their face for just a second. Another man, younger maybe, with a baseball cap pulled low. "Drive, please just drive," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, and she was crouched down in the seat like she was trying to make herself smaller. I started the engine and put it in drive, purposely taking the route that would bring us past the front of the store where the cameras were, and as we pulled away, I watched in my mirrors as the tall man got back into the Chrysler, smooth and unhurried like he had all the time in the world. They didn't turn their headlights on until we were already on the access road, and then those bright HIDs blazed to life, staying exactly 3 car lengths behind us no matter how I adjusted my speed. "What did you do to piss these guys off?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my knuckles went white on the steering wheel. The woman was twisted around in her seat, watching them through the back window, and her breathing was coming in these short, sharp gasps like she might hyperventilate. "I don't know them, I swear to God I don't know them," she said, and her voice had this raw edge of genuine terror that's hard to fake. "I was just shopping for groceries, normal Wednesday night stuff, and when I came out they were parked right next to my car, just sitting there with the engine running." She turned back around and pressed her palms against her eyes like she was trying to push away a headache. At first I thought maybe they were waiting for someone else, but then they followed me out of the parking lot, and every turn I made, every lane change, they were right there. The Chrysler suddenly accelerated, closing the gap between us to maybe 1 car length, and their high beams flashed twice, deliberate and measured. I pressed harder on the gas, my truck's V8 responding immediately, and took a sharp right onto Industrial Road without using my signal, tires squealing slightly on the cold asphalt. The Chrysler made the turn perfectly, like they knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it. And now they were riding our bumper so close, I could see the tall man's face in my rearview mirror, still wearing those sunglasses, his expression completely blank. The woman started digging through her purse frantically, pulling out a dead iPhone, some crumpled receipts, a prescription bottle that rattled with pills, and finally a small canister of pepper spray that she clutched like a lifeline. "The police station is just another 2 miles, I said, trying to reassure both of us, but then the Chrysler did something that made my whole body go rigid. They pulled into the oncoming traffic lane like they were going to pass us, except there was a semi-truck barreling toward us from the opposite direction, headlights blazing, horn blaring in one long, terrified note. For 3 seconds that felt like hours. The Chrysler stayed right beside us, the passenger window rolled down, and the younger man was pointing something at us. Not a gun, but a phone, recording everything. Then they dropped back behind us just as the semi roared past, missing them by maybe 2 feet, the wind from it rocking my truck sideways. "Jesus Christ, they're insane," I muttered, my heart slamming against my ribs, and I grabbed my own phone from the cup holder, trying to dial 911 while keeping us on the road. The woman was sobbing now, real ugly, crying with snot and everything, her pepper spray hand shaking so bad I was worried she'd accidentally spray us both. "They're going to kill us, they're actually going to kill us," she kept saying, rocking back and forth in the seat. And I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I wasn't sure anymore. The 911 operator picked up just as the Chrysler rammed us from behind, not hard enough to spin us out, but enough to jolt us forward, my phone flying out of my hand and sliding under the seat. The woman screamed, this piercing shriek that made my ears ring, and in the mirror I could see the tall man had taken his sunglasses off finally, revealing eyes that were completely calm, almost bored-looking, like this was just another Wednesday night for him. That's what scared me most. Not the aggression, but the casual indifference, like we were just items on a checklist he needed to cross off. I yanked the wheel hard left onto a side street, tires screaming against the pavement, and floored it past dark houses where normal people were probably watching TV or getting ready for bed, completely unaware of the nightmare playing out 30 feet from their front doors. The Chrysler stayed with us, their engine roaring as they matched every move, and I could hear the woman hyperventilating beside me, these ragged gasps between sobs that sounded like she might pass out. "There's a fire station up here," I shouted, remembering it from my routes. Always people there, always lit up, and sure enough I could see those bright bay doors glowing like salvation about a quarter-mile ahead. But the Chrysler must have realized where we were heading because they suddenly accelerated hard, pulling alongside us again. And this time the passenger window was all the way down and the younger man was leaning out, holding something that glinted in the streetlights. Not a gun, but a tire iron. And he swung it at my side mirror with this controlled precision that shattered it completely, glass exploding across the side of my truck. The woman went silent, that kind of shocked quiet that's somehow worse than screaming, and I could see her lips moving like she was praying, but no sound was coming out. We were maybe 500 feet from the fire station when the Chrysler suddenly slammed on their brakes and spun into a perfect J-turn, heading back the way we'd come like they'd never been chasing us at all. I skidded into the fire station lot, barely missing a parked ambulance, and stopped right in front of the open bay where 3 firefighters were washing a truck. They looked up, startled, water hoses still in their hands, as I basically fell out of my door on legs that felt like jelly. The woman stayed in the truck, still clutching that pepper spray, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. The firefighters called the cops, and 2 officers showed up within minutes, taking our statements while we sat on a bench outside the station. The woman wrapped in one of those silver emergency blankets even though she insisted she wasn't cold. They found the Chrysler abandoned about 2 miles away. Stolen plates, interior wiped clean, like professionals had been using it. The really sick part came 3 days later when I saw on the news that they'd found a woman's body in a drainage ditch off Highway 83. And while they never confirmed it was connected, the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The woman I'd helped disappeared from the fire station while I was giving my second statement to the detectives. Just gone, like she'd never existed, leaving only that prescription bottle she'd dropped in my truck. The label was torn where the name should have been, but I could make out part of an address in Mechanicsburg. I drove by once, about a month later, and it was just an empty lot with a "for sale" sign, grass grown tall like nothing had ever been built there. I still take a different route home now, even though it adds 20 minutes to my drive, and sometimes I wake up thinking about those calm, bored eyes in my rearview mirror, and wondering if maybe I wasn't the one being tested that night, if maybe she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and I was just the random factor they hadn't counted on. The GPS died right when we needed it most, somewhere between Clearfield and Bellefonte, on a stretch of Route 322 that seemed forgotten by time. I remember joking with Vanessa about how we were probably the youngest people to drive through here since the Clinton administration. We just celebrated my 31st birthday the week before, and this spontaneous trip to visit her sister in State College was supposed to be a fun detour from our usual Philadelphia routine. The engine started making that grinding noise around 9 at night, just as the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. We managed to coast into the gravel parking lot of a place called the Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, though the neon sign had half its letters burnt out so it read more like W is ring P-E's. Vanessa grabbed my arm as we sat there in the sudden silence of the dead engine, both of us staring at the single lit window in what looked like the office. A yellowish glow that seemed too warm, too inviting for a place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. The man behind the desk must have been watching us from that window because he opened the door before we even made it halfway across the parking lot, standing there with this huge grin that showed all his teeth. "Car trouble?" he called out, and something about the way he said it made me think he already knew the answer. His name tag read Leonard, and he had this way of standing too close when he talked, like he was sharing a secret even when he was just telling us about the rooms. He kept insisting we take room 7, right next to the office, saying it was their best one with the newest mattress and the strongest water pressure, practically pushing the key into my hand before I'd even finished filling out the registration card. Vanessa tried asking about calling a tow service, but Leonard just kept nodding and smiling, saying, tomorrow, everything's closed now, you folks just get some rest." The way he watched us walk to our room, standing in that doorway with the light behind him casting his shadow all the way across the parking lot, I kept thinking about how a spider must look to a fly, patient and still and somehow satisfied. Room 7 had that smell all old motels have, like carpet cleaner fighting a losing battle against decades of cigarette smoke and mildew. The wallpaper was this faded green pattern that looked like eyes when you weren't looking directly at it, and the bed made a sound like breaking bones when we sat down to test it. Vanessa went straight to the bathroom while I played with the television, trying to get anything other than static on the ancient box that probably predated cable itself. That's when I noticed the connecting door to room 8, painted the same ugly beige as the walls, but with fresh scratches around the deadbolt, like someone had tried to open it from the other side recently. The vent above it was enormous, one of those old metal grates that probably connected the whole row of rooms for heating, and I could swear I heard something moving through it, a soft shuffling like fabric against metal. Leonard had been so insistent about us taking this room, and now, looking at that door with its single deadbolt and those scratches, I wondered what was on the other side that made room 7 so special. We tried to settle in for the night, telling ourselves we'd deal with everything in the morning when the sun was up, and the world made sense again. Vanessa found a deck of cards in the nightstand drawer, along with a Bible that had whole pages torn out and what looked like fingernail marks on the cover, and we played a few hands of rummy just to have something normal to focus on. Around 11:30, just as we were thinking about trying to sleep, we heard it. 3 soft knocks on the connecting door, so gentle they could have been accidental, except they came in a perfect rhythm: knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. We both went completely still, cards forgotten on the bedspread between us, waiting to see if we'd imagined it. Then came the whispering through the vent, 2 voices maybe, or 3, having what sounded like an argument in hushed tones, the words just unclear enough that we couldn't make them out, but distinct enough that we knew they were words. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard what sounded like furniture being quietly moved, dragging sounds across carpet, and then Leonard's voice, clear as day, saying, "They're perfect, absolutely perfect." Vanessa grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks, her eyes wide in the dim light from the bathroom we'd left on, and we both knew we needed to get out of that room immediately. I crept to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain just an inch, trying to see if anyone was in the parking lot, and that's when I realized the office was completely dark, not just closed but abandoned looking, like it had been empty for hours. Our car sat there useless in the same spot, and beyond it, parked behind the office where we hadn't noticed it before, was a white van with mud-covered plates and what looked like heavy blankets covering the back windows. The whispering from the vent stopped suddenly, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse, like everyone on the other side of that door was holding their breath, waiting. I motioned for Vanessa to grab our things, moving as quietly as possible, shoving our phones and wallets into our pockets, leaving everything else behind. We had made it to the main door, my hand on the deadbolt, when we heard the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the lock of the connecting door from the other side. The deadbolt on the connecting door held, but we could hear multiple keys jingling, someone trying different ones, and Leonard's voice came through the vent again, no longer whispering but speaking in a normal tone like he knew we could hear him. "Now don't make this difficult, folks. We've done this 12 times before without any fuss." Those words hit me like ice water, 12 times before, and suddenly every news story I'd ever ignored about missing couples flashed through my mind. Vanessa was already at the main door, turning the lock as quietly as she could, but it wouldn't budge, like it had been secured from the outside somehow. The window was our only option, one of those old motel windows that's supposed to slide sideways but has been painted shut so many times it might as well be welded closed. I grabbed the desk chair and swung it at the glass while Vanessa pushed the dresser against the connecting door, which was now rattling violently as someone threw their weight against it. The window exploded outward in a shower of glass, and cold October air rushed in, bringing with it the sound of doors opening all along the motel, not just 1 or 2, but what sounded like every single room emptying out at once. We went through that window like our lives depended on it, which they did. Vanessa first and then me, both of us landing hard on the concrete sidewalk outside, glass crunching under our feet. Behind us, I could hear the connecting door finally give way, wood splintering as the dresser toppled over, and Leonard's voice shouting instructions to someone named Carl about blocking the highway. We ran toward the tree line behind the motel, about 50 yards of open ground that felt like miles, and I could hear footsteps spreading out behind us. Not just 1 or 2 people, but what sounded like a dozen, their feet hitting the gravel in an organized pattern like they'd done this before, like they knew exactly how to hunt people in the dark. The woods were thick with undergrowth that tore at our clothes and faces, But we pushed through, Vanessa's hand in mine, both of us breathing so hard it hurt, branches snapping under our feet loud enough to give away our position to anyone listening. Behind us, flashlight beams cut through the trees in coordinated sweeps, and I heard Leonard's voice, calm and almost amused. They always run to the woods every single time. The ground suddenly dropped away beneath us, and we tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling through dead leaves and mud until we splashed into a creek at the bottom, the freezing water shocking us both into silence. We pressed ourselves against the bank, hidden under the overhang of roots and earth, listening to the footsteps above us moving in a line, systematic and patient like they were grid-searching the area. Vanessa was shaking so hard I had to hold her tight to keep her teeth from chattering and giving us away, and we stayed there in that freezing water for what must have been an hour, maybe more, listening to our hunters move back and forth above us, occasionally calling out to each other in code words that meant nothing to us, but clearly meant something to them. At one point, someone walked right above our hiding spot, dirt and pebbles raining down on us, and we held our breath until spots danced in my vision. Then gradually the sounds moved away, back toward the motel, and we heard vehicle engines starting up, multiple vehicles, and the sound of them driving away in different directions. But not all of them. We could still hear at least one engine idling in the distance, waiting. We stayed in that creek until the first hints of dawn started showing through the trees. Both of us so cold, we could barely feel our legs when we finally crawled out. Following the water downstream seemed safer than going back up the embankment, so we waded through the shallow parts, supporting each other when one of us stumbled, until we came to a place where the creek passed under a small bridge, an actual road, not just another forest trail. We climbed up to it carefully, checking both directions multiple times before stepping onto the asphalt, and that's when we saw the gas station about a quarter-mile down, its lights bright and welcoming in the early morning gloom. The attendant, a woman named Rosie according to her name tag, took one look at us, soaked, muddy, covered in cuts and scratches, and immediately called 911 while wrapping us in blankets she pulled from behind the counter. She kept asking what happened, but all I could manage was the Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, and her face went completely white. "That place has been closed for 3 years," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "ever since they found those bodies in the crawl space under room 8. The state police found our car still sitting in that gravel lot, but the motel looked different in daylight. Abandoned, windows boarded up, the office door hanging open on broken hinges showing nothing but an empty room full of debris and old furniture covered in dust. Room 7's door was standing open too, and inside they found our suitcases exactly where we'd left them, but the connecting door to room 8 had been sealed with concrete blocks years ago, according to the construction date someone had written on the mortar. The officers kept exchanging looks when we insisted there had been people there, at least a dozen of them, and Leonard at the desk checking us in. But then one of them found fresh tire tracks behind the office, multiple vehicles just like we'd said, and suddenly they were taking us very seriously. They brought in dogs and more officers, and within hours they'd found the underground entrance hidden in the woods about 200 yards from the motel, a storm cellar door covered with branches that led to a tunnel system someone had dug to connect to the motel's original basement. Inside, they found mattresses, chains bolted to the walls, and personal belongings that would eventually be matched to 7 missing couples from the past 2 years. They never caught Leonard or any of the others, though the FBI got involved and set up a whole task force dedicated to finding them. The investigators told us we were lucky, that most people who get taken to places like that don't make it out, and they kept asking if we remembered any other details, any names besides Leonard and Carl, any identifying features. But trauma has a way of making things fuzzy, and all I could really remember clearly was that smile of Leonard's and the sound of all those doors opening at once. We testified before a grand jury 6 months later, helped them put together a timeline of events, looked at hundreds of photos trying to identify anyone. But these people were ghosts. No fingerprints in the database, no DNA matches, nothing. The only real lead came from analyzing the tunnel system, which showed construction techniques consistent with mining operations from the 1980s, suggesting at least some of them had that kind of background. Vanessa and I tried to go back to normal life in Philadelphia, but we ended up moving to Colorado 2 years later, somewhere far from any rural motels, somewhere with lots of lights and people and no connecting doors in hotel rooms. The nightmares stopped eventually, mostly, though I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear that soft knocking pattern. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. And Vanessa can't stand the sound of keys jingling without going completely rigid. We keep in touch with Detective Morrison, who ran the investigation, and every few months he calls to tell us about another abandoned motel they've searched, another tunnel system they've found, always empty by the time they get there. Like Leonard and his group just pack up and move on to the next place whenever they feel the heat getting close. The last time Morrison called, about 3 months ago, he mentioned they'd found something interesting in an abandoned motel near the West Virginia border. Registration cards in a hidden drawer, dozens of them, all filled out in different handwriting but all for room 7. And our names were there along with 23 other couples, dated over a 5-year period. Only 7 couples were ever reported missing, which means the rest either were never reported or, and this is what keeps me up at night, they're still out there somewhere in places no one's thought to look yet. Morrison thinks Leonard's group is still operating just more carefully now, maybe using campgrounds or vacation rentals instead of motels, and he always ends our calls the same way. Keep your doors locked, and if you ever break down on a rural road again, sleep in your car. The mornings back then were quiet, and the bus stop outside my neighborhood always felt strangely isolated, despite being just a few blocks from the main road. My name's Emily, and at the time I was 17, juggling early classes and a part-time job at a small bookstore. The bus shelter was made of glass panels with faint scratches that caught the morning light, and I used to lean against one of them with my headphones in, half awake, half dreaming. The street across from the stop had a row of houses that looked almost identical. Same trimmed hedges, same mailboxes tilted forward like they were listening. It was the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened, until it did. On a Wednesday morning, I noticed a man standing across the street. He was tall, maybe in his late 40s, wearing a gray coat that looked a size too big for him. At first, I assumed he was just another commuter waiting for someone to pick him up. He had a brown paper cup in his hand and seemed focused on the traffic, barely moving. Still, something about how still he stood made me glance at him every so often. When the bus arrived, I forgot about him and went on with my day, not realizing I would start seeing him again. Every morning after that. By the 3rd day, it had become routine. I'd reach the bus stop around 7:05, and he'd already be there. Same coat, same spot, same stillness. Sometimes he'd tilt his head slightly, like he was trying to catch something in the distance. I told myself he was probably walking to work after watching his kid get on the bus or something harmless like that. But what unsettled me was how I never actually saw him leave. The bus would come, and as it pulled away, he'd still be there, standing in the same place as if frozen in a loop. It was around the 5th morning that my sense of comfort began to unravel. I had overslept and rushed out the door without my usual coffee, expecting to see the empty stop for once. But he was already there, closer this time, on my side of the street, standing near the edge of the glass shelter. He wasn't looking at me directly. His eyes were angled toward the panel beside me, almost like he was examining a reflection. That's when I realized he wasn't facing the street at all. He was watching me through the glass. The next morning, I asked my mom to drop me off instead of taking the bus. She laughed at first when I told her about the man, but I could tell from her face that she was uneasy too. That evening, she called the transportation office and asked if the shelter had security cameras, and surprisingly, they said yes. One mounted high on a nearby lamppost. The following night, we drove over there after dinner. The streetlights flickered unevenly, and the shelter's glass reflected our car headlights back at us like a warning. My mom parked, and we just sat there for a moment, watching that same spot where he used to stand. Empty, of course. We got permission from the bus company to review the footage a day later. The technician set up the recording on a small monitor, scrubbing through the mornings one by one. There he was, standing perfectly still across the street on Monday, then closer on Wednesday, then right by the shelter by Friday. But what chilled me wasn't the proximity. It was how he never looked at the road. In every clip, his gaze was locked on the glass panel, even when no bus came. When I showed up, he'd subtly angle his head, lining his eyes with mine through the reflection. Mom called the school afterward, and they contacted local police. I expected that to be the end of it, just a creepy stranger caught on camera. But when the officer checked traffic footage from other intersections, they found something worse. He had been following the route my bus took, walking or sometimes catching another bus behind mine, all the way to school. There were short clips of him standing at corners, watching the same bus number go by every morning. The footage didn't show what he did after, but it was enough to make my stomach knot up every time I left the house. The next day, my mom drove me to school herself. I kept glancing at the sidewalks, half expecting that gray coat to appear again between cars. For a few days, nothing happened. The police said they'd patrol the area near the stop, and the driver was told to report anything strange. Then, early that Sunday before sunrise, my mom found something tucked between our front door and the frame. A crumpled bus schedule with my route circled in red ink. The police took the schedule as evidence, but there were no fingerprints, nothing they could trace. They assumed it might have been someone from the neighborhood trying to scare me, but my mom disagreed. She started driving me everywhere. School, work, even the grocery store. I stopped going out alone. Still, the sense of being watched didn't fade. Sometimes I'd see a gray blur near the edge of a parking lot or behind a fence, and my heart would start pounding before I could even think. I could never confirm it was him, but the feeling lingered like a shadow you can't shake off. 2 weeks later, a patrol officer knocked on our door. He said they had identified the man through transit records. His name was Charles Avery, a 52-year-old who lived 3 neighborhoods away. He had been reported before for following young girls near different bus stops, but always disappeared before they could press charges. When the officer showed me his photo, it was him. The same blank stare, the same oversized coat. They issued a restraining order, but I knew that piece of paper wouldn't stop someone like him if he really wanted to find me. After that, my mom decided to move. It wasn't a dramatic move across the country, just a few towns over, but it felt like starting over. New routes, new streets, no glass shelters. For months, I refused to stand near bus stops or anything reflective. Even mirrors made me uneasy. The police said they hadn't seen him again, but I caught myself checking rearview mirrors and windows, expecting those eyes to appear behind me in the faint reflection of glass. It has been years now, and I still take a different route home every week, just in case. I never saw him again, but every morning when the light hits a bus shelter or a store window, I can't help but glance at the reflection before I step closer. Sometimes I think about how long he must have been there before I ever noticed him. How many times he might have been watching, hidden in plain sight. The apartment my boyfriend and I moved into last spring was small, but it finally felt like ours. We were both working late shifts back then, and the building had this quiet hum at night, like everything outside the walls just stopped existing. It should have felt peaceful, but sometimes that silence felt too heavy, almost expectant. About 2 weeks after settling in, we started hearing footsteps in the hallway after midnight. Not quick ones. Slow, steady, and always stopping near our door. We laughed it off at first, telling ourselves it was probably a neighbor getting home late or the pipes creaking. But every night, around the same time, the sound returned, pausing right outside like someone was listening. After the 3rd night, my boyfriend Ethan decided to check through the peephole. He said the hallway was empty, lights dim, nothing moving except for the shadow of the plant near the stairwell. Still, I could tell by the way his voice tightened that it bothered him. The next morning, we found a faint smudge on the lower part of the door, like someone had brushed their hand there. It was oily, grayish, almost like residue from a glove. That was when we agreed to install a security camera outside the door. Ethan ordered one online that could stream directly to our phones. He spent half of Saturday afternoon setting it up, double-checking every angle until the hallway looked perfectly centered in the frame. For a few nights, things went quiet. I would check the camera feed before bed and feel this small sense of relief, seeing nothing but the still hallway and the dim light flickering above the elevator. Then, about a week later, I woke up around 3 in the morning and instinctively opened the app. The live feed showed someone standing at the far end of the hallway, just where the light started to fade. They were facing our direction, not moving. The person didn't come closer, didn't knock, just stood there. I woke Ethan, but by the time he grabbed his phone, the figure was gone. We replayed the clip, but for some reason the motion detection hadn't saved it. The next day, Ethan adjusted the sensitivity settings and set up notifications. We tried to go back to normal, convincing ourselves maybe it was a glitch or maybe one of the neighbors wandering half asleep. A few days later, though, we checked the recordings again, and there he was. Same spot, same hour, 2:37 in the morning. The figure stood right at the edge of the camera's view, barely lit, wearing what looked like a dark jacket. The face was impossible to make out, but what unnerved me most was the posture, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something. We decided to keep watching over the next few nights before calling the police, hoping maybe it would stop on its own. That night, Ethan and I sat up together, watching the live feed until after 3. Nothing happened. Around 2:37, the hallway remained empty, the camera showing only the hum of that faint light. We were about to shut off our phones when a shadow flickered at the far edge of the frame, not entering, just lingering. It looked like a shoulder, the curve of someone standing half behind the corner. The motion alert went off and Ethan leaned forward, whispering something like, "He's back." But again, the moment we tried zooming in, the figure disappeared. It was as if the camera glitched the exact second we focused on him. By then, sleep was impossible. We emailed the footage to the property manager and asked if there had been any reports of someone wandering the halls. He replied the next morning saying the building was quiet and there were no maintenance staff working overnight. He even checked the other floor cameras, but ours was the only one showing that dark silhouette. That reply didn't bring much comfort. It only made the whole thing feel more targeted. Like whoever that man was, he had chosen our floor for a reason. Ethan tried to laugh about it, calling it our personal ghost, but the joke landed flat. 2 days later, I went through the recordings while Ethan was at work. My hands were trembling slightly, partly from lack of sleep. Every night, exactly 2:37, the same shape appeared. Same spot, same stillness. But when I paused the latest clip, I noticed something different. A faint logo on the man's jacket sleeve. I zoomed in as far as the grainy footage allowed, and the words, "Swift Drop Delivery" came into view. I had never heard of that company before. I checked online, expecting to find some local courier service, but there was nothing. No listings, no reviews, not even a logo match. Ethan called the police that evening. 2 officers came by, reviewed the footage, and took a copy with them. They told us they'd try enhancing it. The younger one, Officer Delgado, asked if we'd recently ordered any packages or groceries. We hadn't. When he came back a few days later, his tone had changed. Quieter, more serious. He said the footage enhancement showed the man's jacket clearly, and that Swift Drop Delivery wasn't a registered business in our city. It didn't even exist in the state database. When Ethan asked if they could track the logo or uniform, Delgado hesitated before saying, "That's the strange part. This logo was used by a company that shut down 8 years ago, after one of their drivers went missing on his route." After hearing that, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me tense up, waiting for the next notification. Ethan wanted to take the camera down for a while, said it was making us paranoid, but I refused. If that man came back, I wanted proof. The next night, I left the live feed running on my phone while we tried to rest. The hours dragged by until 2:37 arrived again. This time, the camera picked him up closer, not right by the door, but a few feet nearer than before. He stood there for about 10 seconds, then turned his head slightly toward the lens as if acknowledging it. Then he walked out of frame, disappearing into the stairwell. Ethan ran into the hallway seconds later, phone flashlight on, but the place was empty. No sound of footsteps, no movement. When he came back in, he was pale and said the air in the hallway smelled faintly like gasoline. We checked the footage again and froze at what we saw. Before leaving, the man had set something down by the stairwell, a small brown parcel. The police came immediately after we called. The package contained nothing but an old photo, wrapped in a delivery invoice from SwiftDrop dated 8 years ago. The name on it was unfamiliar to us, but the address printed below was our apartment number. Officer Delgado said they'd investigate the name. He came back 2 days later with an update that made my chest tighten. The name on that invoice belonged to the previous tenant, a man who'd gone missing nearly a decade ago, right after reporting that someone had been following him home from work. Delgado didn't say much more, only that the case files mentioned a suspect wearing a delivery jacket. Ethan and I decided to move out the following week. I tried to leave the camera with the new tenant, but I could not bring myself to explain why. It has been months since then, and I still check the app out of habit, even though the camera's offline. The last clip saved before we left shows the empty hallway, time-stamped 2:37 in the morning. For a second, the light flickers, and something faint appears near the edge. A shape, maybe, or a reflection. I do not watch it anymore. The police never found the man, and SwiftDrop remains a company that does not exist. But sometimes, around that hour, I wake up without reason and feel the quiet pressing in from outside, like someone's still standing there, waiting to be seen.